the demonically beautiful and atmospheric, yet complex and conflicting portrayal of Yukio Mishima makes Mishima Alive in 4 Chapters arguably one of the greatest biopics ever made. Not because it captures the hard journey towards succeeding that we see in every other biopic of an artist, but because it captures something far greater than that. The film is focused on the essence, ideology, philosophy, and existence of Yukio Mishima. But as you might know, Yukio Mishima is still to this day a very controversial character in Japanese culture. And even before the production of the film, the far-right nationalist groups objected to the appropriation of their homosexual, aesthetic, homo-fascist hero by a non-Japanese director, even though half of the crew in the film were Japanese. And this was a massive concern, since the same group had torn up the theater at a screening of a Chinese-Japanese collaborative-made movie. But this wasn't the biggest concern. Yukio Mishima's widow was very much against the film's representation of her late husband's homosexuality and last act on November 25th. So she took away Paul Schrader's license to portraying the blatant homosexual novels of Yukio Mishima, such as Confessions of a Mask and Forbidden Colors. But since she had already signed an agreement to allow production of the film, the best she could do was to make sure that no one would see it, and that she did by preventing the film from releasing in Japan. And so it didn't, and it still hasn't released in Japan to this day since its release in 1985. And during the time when Paul Schrader was networking trying to finance the film, he succeeded in getting $1 million of the film's budget from a Japanese company called Toho Towa. And when Paul Schrader approached one of the executives of Toho Towa at the Cannes Film Festival to thank him for helping getting the film made, the executive told Schrader that they had absolutely nothing to do with the film at all during the pre-production nor the production of the film. Yukio Mishima was a writer who spent most of his time writing novels, short stories, and playwrights, but it wasn't long before he found that words were insufficient and deceitful, so he found other ways to simultaneously express himself. He became acquainted with acting, directing, bodybuilding, and even leading his own private army. The same can be said about a lot of Mishima's fictional characters. For example, there's of course the protagonist in Runaway Horses, who just like Mishima finds purpose in action.
でも、しないじゃ限界があって、本当の力は出ないんです。
And the word purpose is essential in discussing the acts of Mishima. Mishima was looking for a purpose to live. Reviewing some of his last speeches and interviews, you can clearly see he states that if you do not find a purpose worth dying for, you may find it meaningless to go on living. It's a contradiction, but because he couldn't specifically find a real purpose, he fabricated one by staging a coup and turned it into existential art in form of a dramatic suicide. But in order to capture Mishima's transformation towards action, Paul Schrader took 3 existential dilemmas: beauty, art, and action, in the shape of loose adaptations of 3 of Mishima's novels: The Temple of the Golden Pavilion, which focuses on the existence of beauty; Kyoko's House, focusing on the existence of art; and finally Runaway Horses, which focuses on the existence of action. But Mishima's conclusion wasn't just turning away from the expression of art and going all out on action, but instead to harmonize both art and action, which leads me to the next chapter. The characters of Kyoko's House and Runaway Horses both conclude that staged art isn't enough. Osamu from Kyoko's House mentions that staged blood isn't enough. Instead, one has to turn oneself and one's life into a piece of art. Mishima was therefore obsessed with the idea of self-fashioning, of transforming one's body and mind into a work of art. Hence why he spent countless hours at the gym and achieved a body worthy of recreating his own erotic awakening, which is exactly what he did. Mishima's last and ultimate expression of his art happened on November 25, 1970, and though one might argue that Mishima was serious in his attempt to bring back the so-called spirit of Japan by restoring the power of the emperor, I, as well as many others, believe that Mishima was totally aware of his failure and arranged the coup with the intentions of dying a dramatic death. Reviewing a lot of his writings before his ritual suicide and even some of his earliest works, which includes Confessions of a Mask, a novel he wrote at the age of 24, it seems that his death was planned and that Mishima himself always decided on dying young and beautiful, which parallels perfectly with the samurai ideology of living beautifully and also dying beautifully.